Before everything went spectacularly wrong, Iran was America's best friend in the Middle East. Our guy was Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a man who combined a love for military hardware with a flair for ridiculously expensive parties. In 1971, he threw a bash to celebrate 2,500 years of the Persian monarchy, costing an estimated $100 million while some of his people were starving. To keep the public's appreciation in check, he had a famously cheerful secret police force called Savak. Their methods were persuasive. The U.S. saw the Shah as a stable, modernizing force, a bulwark against the Soviets. This is a classic case of seeing what you want to see, while ignoring the fact that the entire house is soaked in gasoline. Meanwhile, sitting in exile just outside Paris was a stern, bearded cleric named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. While the Shah was hosting dinner parties, Khomeini was recording sermons onto cassette tapes. These tapes were smuggled into Iran and became the world's most viral anti-monarchy mixtapes, spreading his message of Islamic revolution. Then, the Shah got a diagnosis of lymphoma. He needed advanced medical treatment, and he knew just who to call. This single decision to seek help from his American friends would become the trigger for a geopolitical meltdown. President Jimmy Carter's administration debated this for weeks. Letting the Shah into the U.S. for cancer treatment seemed like the humane thing to do. To Iranians who had just overthrown him, it looked suspiciously like the U.S. was prepping for another 1953, when the CIA helped put the Shah back in power. So on November 4, 1979, a group calling themselves the Muslim Student Followers of the Imam's Line decided to protest. Their plan was to occupy the U.S. Embassy for just a little while to make a point. It turns out they were very, very good at making their point. The students stormed the gates, and a handful of Marines inside were quickly overwhelmed. They captured 66 Americans. A few were later released, leaving 52. The initial reaction in Washington was, essentially, they'll get tired and go home. This was a severe misreading of the room. Khomeini, seeing the massive popular support for the embassy takeover, co-opted it immediately. It was no longer a student protest. It was the official policy of the new Iranian government. The minor incident was now a full-blown international crisis. The United States, the world superpower, was utterly powerless. Back home, the crisis became a national obsession. It was the first major news event to get this kind of 24/7 coverage. ABC News started a nightly special report called The Iran Crisis America Held Hostage. You might know it today as Nightline. News anchor Walter Cronkite ended his broadcast every single night by stating the number of days the hostages had been held captive. Yellow ribbons, a symbol of waiting for a loved one, appeared on trees, mailboxes, and lapels across the country. Jimmy Carter's presidency, his re-election campaign, his entire political future was now shackled to the fate of 52 people half a world away. Naturally, America tried talking. It did not go well. Iran's demands were simple. The U.S. had to return the Shah for trial, hand over his immense fortune, and apologize for decades of interference. The U.S. response was, predictably, no on all counts. Negotiations went nowhere. The UN passed resolutions that were ignored. Even Yasser Arafat of the PLO tried to mediate, which tells you how strange the situation situation was. Every diplomatic overture slammed into a brick wall of revolutionary fervor. The Iranians weren't negotiating, they were performing on a world stage, and the US was their unwilling co-star. After months of frustration, Carter approved a military rescue mission. It was called Operation Eagle Claw, and it was a masterpiece of complexity. The plan involved C-130 transport planes, RH-53D Sea Stallion helicopters, Delta Force commandos, and Army Rangers. They would fly into a secret desert landing zone codenamed Desert 1, refuel, and then the commandos would be flown by helicopter to Tehran. After storming the embassy and freeing the hostages, they'd meet at a stadium, fly to a captured airfield, and then be flown out of Iran. It was a plan that required perfect weather, perfect timing, and flawless execution from 4 different branches of the military that didn't usually work together. What could possibly go wrong? The mission launched on April 24, 1980. Immediately, things started to fail. The 8 helicopters flew into an unexpected, massive dust storm called a haboob. One had to turn back due to equipment failure. Another landed in the desert after a critical part cracked. A third arrived at Desert 1 with a failing hydraulic system. The mission required a minimum of 6 helicopters to proceed. They were down to 5. After hours on the ground in the middle of the Iranian desert, the commander, Colonel Charles Beckwith, made the only call he could. He scrubbed the mission. The rescue was over before it even began. The order was given to pack up and go home. But the universe wasn't done humiliating them yet. In the darkness and swirling dust, one of the remaining helicopters, trying to reposition for takeoff, sliced into the side of a C-130 transport plane full of fuel and soldiers. The result was a catastrophic explosion. A giant fireball lit up the desert sky for miles. 8 American servicemen were killed. The survivors scrambled onto the other C-130s and fled, leaving behind the dead, 5 helicopters, weapons, maps, and secret documents. The next day, Iranian television was gleefully broadcasting images of the wreckage and charred bodies to the entire world. The humiliation was absolute. The failure of Operation Eagle Claw was a gut punch. Yet, weirdly, it might have helped end the crisis. It showed Iran that America was getting desperate. Then, 2 things changed the calculus. First, in July 1980, the Shah died of cancer in Egypt. One of Iran's core demands was now biologically impossible. Second, in September, Iraq's Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, starting a brutal 8-year war. Suddenly, Iran needed money. It needed its billions in frozen assets that the US was holding. The revolutionary theatrics became a lot less important than funding a war for national survival. So they quietly signaled they were ready to talk, using Algerian diplomats as intermediaries. The negotiations were painfully slow, coming down to the wire of the 1980 U.S. presidential election, which Carter lost in a landslide to Ronald Reagan. The Iranians, having a finely tuned sense of political cruelty, dragged out the final details. They despised Carter and wanted to deny him any credit. The final agreement, the Algiers Accords, was signed. The U.S. unfroze nearly $8 billion in Iranian assets. The hostages were put on a plane in Tehran, but it sat on the tarmac for hours. Their plane was only allowed to take off after Ronald Reagan had officially finished his inaugural address on January 20, 1981. After 444 days, the crisis ended not with a bang, but with a perfectly timed political insult. So, what did America learn? Well, we learned that complex military operations are hard. The failure led directly to the creation of the U.S. Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, so that was something. We learned that a 24-hour news cycle can turn a crisis into a national soap opera, paralyzing a presidency. The relationship between the US and Iran was permanently broken, a toxic divorce that continues to this day. The crisis proved that a smaller nation could humiliate a superpower using asymmetric tactics, a lesson other groups around the world were watching closely. It was a 444-day lesson in the limits of power, the unpredictability of history, and the spectacular ways in which things can go wrong. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!